everybody, welcome to the December video of the month, and I hope that you all have had a great Christmas break. I did, and I'm sad that it's almost over. But okay, one fun thing I did over break was I finally saw Fantastic Beasts and the Crimes of Grindelwald, and I know it got a lot of really bad reviews, but I loved it. I thought it was so good, and so yeah, that was really fun, and yeah. Anyway, the theme of this video is perseverance, and that's something you find a lot of in Harry Potter. And perseverance is steadfastness in doing something despite difficulty or delay in achieving success. It basically means that you have a goal in mind and you fail again and again trying to reach that goal, but you don't give up and you just keep persevering. There's usually a lot of obstacles and difficulties you have to overcome, and eventually you are successful because you never gave up. This is something that's really hard to do. A lot of times, our natural instinct when we fail at something, especially if we just keep failing again and again and again, our natural instinct is to give up. But if you're able to persevere through something, then oftentimes that's what it takes to be successful, and that's what sets you apart from others who will just give up. The different characters in Harry Potter failed again and again at things before they were able to overcome certain obstacles. And actually, they spent a lot of the books being really confused, not knowing exactly what they were supposed to do, and they weren't sure how they could overcome certain problems, and the only thing they could do was just to try again and again everything they could think of, and they ended up failing a lot. They ended up being wrong a lot, but eventually, just because they just kept persevering and working at things, they were able to figure out solutions to their problems. I'm going to talk about some of the times that perseverance was shown throughout the different Harry Potter books, and one time when perseverance was not shown and it ended in disaster. And so, the first example I'm going to look at is at the very beginning of the first book when um, Albus Dumbledore and Rufus Hagrid, the staff at Hogwarts, were trying to get Harry his registration letter telling him that he'd been accepted to go to Hogwarts and basically telling him that he was a wizard. For 11 years, Harry had lived with his horrible aunt and uncle who hated magic and refused to have anything to do with it. They had never told him that he was a wizard, and when Harry got his first letter, when they saw who it was from, they immediately destroyed the letter. And actually, Hagrid and Dumbledore had to try 8 times before Harry finally got his letter. At first, they would just put it through the mail slot addressed to him, but the Dursleys would destroy it. So then they started getting really creative. They would try to roll the letters up inside of eggs, and they shot a ton down through the chimney. And none of this worked. The Dursleys destroyed them all, and Harry had no idea what his letter said. And finally, after it had gotten so bad that Uncle Vernon had moved his family to a cabin in the middle of the sea just so that the letters wouldn't get to them there, Rufus Hagrid came in person, knocked down the door, and gave Harry his letter. If they hadn't persevered and kept trying and trying to give Harry his letter, that would have been a disaster. Harry would never have known that he was a wizard. He would never have gone to Hogwarts, and basically, he would not have been able to save the wizarding world, and there would be no book series. That would also be really sad. So, that is one example of when perseverance was very important. The second example of when there was perseverance is when, in Harry's second year at Hogwarts, a house elf named Dobby tried everything that he could to stop him from returning to Hogwarts, and then once he was there, he tried everything he could to get him to leave. Now, Dobby knew that there was some great evil was going to happen at Hogwarts, and he wanted Harry to be safe. So he tried everything that he could to stop him from going there. he canceled Harry's letters that were coming to him over the summer in the hope that Harry would think that his best friends had forgotten about him and not want to go back to school. And then he ended up smashing Harry's aunt's pudding and getting Harry into huge trouble. And then once Harry was at Hogwarts, well, before he got to Hogwarts, actually, he closed the barrier that allowed Harry to get onto platform 9 3/4, which is where the Hogwarts Express is hidden. And so Harry crashed into a solid wall, and he and his friend Ron were stuck with no way to get to Hogwarts. So they resorted to using Ron's dad's flying car, which again got Harry into huge trouble. And then once he was at school, he was playing a game of Quidditch, which is a magical sport that involves broomsticks and flying balls, and Dobby tampered with a bludger, which is one of the balls, so that it would not leave Harry alone and kept attacking him. And that ended up breaking his arm, and it could have actually killed him or done some serious harm. So this Dobby's perseverance in trying to save Harry's life ended up not working that well, but it is a good example of when he didn't give up even though Harry Potter kept ignoring him and he went back to Hogwarts. He didn't let that stop him. He kept trying and trying to get him to leave. The third example is a time when Harry himself used perseverance. It was in the first task of the Triwizard Tournament, and Harry figured out that he was going to have to fight a dragon. And he worked out a strategy for fighting the dragon, and it involved summoning the dragon's egg. But the thing was, Harry was very, very bad at summoning spells. He was given extra homework in summoning spells because he was really bad at them in class. He just could not get the hang of it. And he sort of worked out his strategy at the last second, so he had one night to figure out how to master the summoning spell. So this isn't a typical example of perseverance. Usually that's something that you spend a long time working on. But Harry did show perseverance because for literally the entire night, or until very early in the morning, he and his friend Hermione just practiced the summoning charm again and again and again and again and again until he finally got the hang of it. And he had to practice that spell for hours, and he didn't give up, and he just kept going and going until he finally got the hang of it. And if he had not persevered and learned that spell, that would have been really bad because he would not have been able to get the egg from the dragon. And when he went and fought the dragon the next morning, he was able to defeat it and he was able to summon the egg. So he needed to persevere in order to do that. A fourth example of when perseverance was shown was when Harry had to get a memory from Professor Slughorn. And Albus Dumbledore had asked Harry to get this memory because the two of them were trying to understand more about Lord Voldemort in order to help defeat him. And this memory was going to be a key step to helping understand Lord Voldemort. And so Harry started off by just asking Professor Slughorn about the memory, and that was a disaster. Professor Slughorn got extremely upset, and it turned out that whenever Harry would approach him later, trying to ask Professor Slughorn would immediately leave. He would hide if Harry was alone. He would pretend not to be in his room if Harry knocked. He wouldn't talk to him at all because he was so upset about this memory and he didn't want Harry to know about it. And Harry tried again and again and again, and finally he had some lucky potion and he had to take some of that and spend an entire evening just to get the memory from Professor Slughorn. He had to go through a lot, and basically, after a long series of events, he had to wait until Professor Slughorn got so drunk, along with Rubus Hagrid, that he wouldn't remember in the morning after Harry asked him about the memory because he wouldn't remember anything from the night before. If Harry hadn't persevered and just kept trying to get that memory. He and Dumbledore would not have had that um, crucial key to understanding Voldemort's past, and they needed that in order to be able to defeat him. A fifth example of when perseverance was shown was when Voldemort came back, and Harry was the only person who had alive, other than Voldemort's Death Eaters, who of course would not be saying anything, who had actually seen Voldemort return. And so when he came back and he told the wizarding world about what he'd seen and told them that Voldemort was back, the Ministry of Magic panicked. They did not want anybody to think that Voldemort had returned because they knew that people would panic, it would be a disaster, and they didn't want that to happen. And so they immediately started labeling Harry as a liar. They told everybody not to believe him, that Voldemort had not actually returned. And so Harry and his main supporter, Albus Dumbledore, who tried to convince the wizarding world that Voldemort had returned, were laughed at, mocked, called liars. Almost nobody believed them. People thought they were out of their minds or crazy. They thought Harry was just trying to seek even more attention. Nobody believed them. And that was something that throughout Harry's entire fifth year, they tried again and again and again to tell people that Voldemort was back, and nobody would listen to them. And finally, it took Harry giving a secret interview with the Quibbler, which was one of his friend's father's magazine. When people read that interview, that was finally when people started to believe that Voldemort had returned. Not even everybody, just a few more. Harry started to get at least some support. People finally started to believe him. And that took an extremely long time. And that was something that it was very difficult for Harry, especially, to persevere through. Everybody laughed at him and mocked him, and that's pretty difficult to deal with after a long time. But they didn't give up, no matter how many times people would say to Harry that he was lying, that Voldemort was back. He would always argue with them. He'd always tell them about what he'd seen. The same with Professor Dumbledore. No matter how many times people said that he was crazy, he would always support Harry. And yeah, that took a lot of perseverance. The last thing I'm going to talk about is an example of a time when there was not perseverance in Harry Potter, and that ended in disaster. So, in Harry's fifth year, he had a connection with Voldemort where when Voldemort was feeling an extreme emotion, sometimes Harry could feel it too, where he could sometimes access Voldemort's mind. And that was a bad thing. Professor Dumbledore didn't want that to happen. So he asked Professor Snape, whom Harry and Snape hated each other, and so that was pretty bad. But he asked Professor Snape to teach Harry occlumency, which is basically blocking your mind against outside forces that are trying to penetrate it. And Harry was supposed to practice occlumency every single night. This was something that he really, really needed to master, that it was vitally important for him to be able to use, but he never practiced at all. And part of this was because of Snape. Harry hated Snape, and he felt really bitter and resentful about their lessons together, and so that he didn't exactly have any motivation to practice. And part of it was he just didn't. And people would tell him to. His friend Hermione would always ask how his occlumency was going, and he would just make some answer up, but he never actually did it. And so that was something that he would have needed to persevere to master, that he would have needed to try again and again to get the hang of, but he just didn't do it at all. And so, at the very end of the book, Voldemort was able to plant a fake scene in Harry's mind that basically made it look like Voldemort had captured his godfather Sirius and was torturing him. And Harry completely panicked. He had to go through a lot in order for this to happen, but he rounded up some friends, and a few more friends who he didn't want to go with him went with him too, and they went to the Department of Mysteries, which is where Harry thought his godfather was, and they were running to go find him and save him, and it ended up being a trap. Voldemort did not have Sirius. He had just planted that scene in Harry's mind in order to lure him out of Hogwarts and into the Department of Mysteries to make him think. Um, he just made him think that his godfather was in trouble. If Harry had practiced his occlumency, this would not have happened, and he would have never gone to the Department of Mysteries. And so Harry and his friends had to fight Voldemort's Death Eaters, and they were about to. The fight lasted for a long time, and when they were about to be overpowered, some members of the Order of the Phoenix, including Harry's godfather Sirius, came and basically rescued them. But unfortunately, Sirius was killed in that battle. So that ended very, very badly. If Harry had just practiced his occlumency, Sirius would not have died. Perseverance is extremely important. It's one of the biggest keys to success, to just keep working at something until you finally overcome different obstacles and you're able to be successful. And without perseverance, you're not going to have success. And that's really shown a lot in Harry Potter, how when the characters would persevere and try things again and again and again, they would eventually be successful. And then also, when Harry was not persevering with his occlumency, how that resulted in his godfather's death, which is very bad. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you next month. Bye!